fellow Toastmasters and very welcome guest, Leela, our area director. I'm just taking a leaf out of your book. Evaluation. I'm going to talk about why we do it, I'm going to talk about what you evaluate, and I'm going to talk about how to evaluate. Have you ever been at a conference where you've been a speaker, or you've been at a meeting where you've been a speaker, even for just 2 minutes, and you've thought, how did that go? And you've walked up to someone afterwards and said, how was that for you? What do they invariably say? That was fine. That was okay. Or they change the subject. And you know what happens when they change the subject. One of the problems is that we speak in public, but unless you're involved with Toastmasters, you very, very rarely get feedback. And as we all know, for most of the things that we do, getting feedback is how we improve. So why do we evaluate? Well, we evaluate because we're going to improve if we get feedback. Because what feedback will do is it will tell us what we've done well and what the audience got from what we've said. You can ask them things like, did you actually understand the content? What did you think I was asking you to do? But the great thing about Toastmasters is that we actually have a formal process for evaluation, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So what do we evaluate? Now you might be thinking, well, that's obvious, you evaluate the speech. But actually what a lot of, particularly when they start evaluating, what a lot of people do is that they get tied up in the content. And one of the things that's really important is that when you evaluate someone's speech or activity in Toastmasters, or anywhere else for that matter, is that it's important that you focus on how the person delivered the content. Because the problem with getting caught up in the content is that it's very easy to say, well, I didn't like that speech because I disagreed with what the speaker said. And I've seen a lot of Toastmasters, when they first start doing evaluations, focus on what they thought about the content and not what they thought about the speaker's ability to deliver it. So we're looking at things like body language, we're looking at things like vocal variety and use of pauses and things like that. But if someone is working in Toastmasters on a specific project and they're looking for specific feedback, which will be identified by their objectives, then it's most useful as an evaluator to focus on just those objectives. Unless something is obviously something that either they do really well or that they need to know about. So that's why we do it. That's what we're evaluating. How do we do it? Now you've seen several evaluations here, both today and last week. And if you've attended a Toastmasters meeting, you will have seen others. And what we have in Toastmasters is a recommended approach for evaluation. And that's commendation, commendation, commendation. That's the things that the speaker did well. Recommendation, recommendation. That's 2 recommendations. And I'll talk about what a recommendation actually is in a moment. And then finish off either by what you really liked about the speech, or something supportive to the speaker, or a summary. Now, if you're going in for contests in Toastmasters, a summary is actually quite a useful thing to finish with, because it's something the judges look for. And a summary is useful because particularly if you've had several things to say, they might have been complex. A simple summary will help the speaker and the rest of the audience just kind of get to grips with, oh yes, that's just a quick reminder. Because I can see a lot of you writing this down, and not everyone writes down other people's evaluations. In fact, very few people do. So that's the kind of basic format. Now, a recommendation is fairly easy to identify, because it'll be something the speaker did well. It'll be that they used the space well. It'll be that they have very expansive and useful and helpful body language. Recommendations are a little harder, because we don't actually like to criticise people. And what a lot of people do when they start doing evaluations is they avoid criticisms. Now, you should actually avoid criticisms, because a recommendation is not telling someone what they did wrong. What it is telling them how to make something that perhaps is a weakness better. Or even something that they're good at that could be even better if they did something else. For example, we have people who perhaps don't speak in complete sentences. A recommendation would take the form of, it would be really useful if you focused on finishing your sentences when you speak. Now, that's something that they can work off. It's kind of a positive way of telling someone that there's something that needs to be improved. It could be, we sometimes get people who stand on one spot. And what you could say is not, you stand on one spot, but it would be really useful and more helpful to the audience if you moved around more. So, for example, if someone always looks at the ceiling when they're speaking, and I've seen them because I used to be one of them, don't tell them they speak to the ceiling. Tell them it would be useful if they made eye contact with people. So that's really the how you do it. There are some other ways. There are all sorts of recommendations for how to do evaluations, but that is the simplest way to start, is focus on the things they did well. We count 3, it doesn't have to be 3, but 3 is a good place to start. 2 recommendations, and then either what you liked best or a summary at the end. But do make sure that you make more commendations than you do recommendations. And the reason we stick to 2 is that it's actually very difficult to remember more than 2 recommendations. So the only other thing I would like to say is that we have a convention in Toastmasters is that we do all of our evaluations in the third person. In other words, we speak to the whole audience, not just the speaker. And the reason for this is that everybody should be able to learn from your evaluation because they were listening to the speech as well. Gracias.